Hi guys, today I have a repeat guest from 2017, and if I remember correctly, the last I checked, we were in that last chat well over 100,000 views. So turns out that he's been one of my most popular guests, and so he was kind enough to return on the show. Göran Adamson, how are you doing, sir?
I'm fine, Gad, and I'm very happy to be here again. Thank you so much.
Oh, cheers. For the people who don't know you, I just prepared a little brief bio, so let me mention it very quickly. You are an associate professor in sociology at University West in Sweden. Your PhD is from London School of Economics, a great school. Several books that you've written, Populist Parties and the Failures of the Political Elites, The Rise of the Austrian Freedom Party in 2016, and then the book that we discussed most the last time you were here in 2017, The Trojan Horse, a leftist critique of multiculturalism in the West, and your latest book that just came out this year, Masochist, Nationalism, Multicultural Self-Hatred, and the Infatuation with the Exotic. It is based in part on George Orwell's Notes on Nationalism. So what I thought we would do, Göran, is begin with this latest book. There's all kinds of connections between your book and other stuff that I'd like to talk about. But why don't you give us first a summary of the central thesis of that book?
Well, it actually goes back to, as you mentioned, George Orwell. He wrote a very interesting essay. It came out in 1945, and it's called Notes on Nationalism. And I read it, and I was shocked because in this essay there were so many interesting ideas. But I'd just like to bring you two of the most interesting ideas in this essay. First, he talks about negative nationalism, and negative nationalism is just like the nationalism the classic nationalism. And Orwell talks about he says this. He refers to it as a positive nationalism. But negative nationalism is the exact opposite. It is someone who is as interested in his own culture and knows a lot about it, but not in order to idealize it, but in order to criticize it, to compare it not favorably to other cultures, but unfavorably to other cultures or religions or traditions. So that's a very interesting idea, and I haven't heard about it that much. So I think Orwell's idea about negative nationalism is highly interesting. And then also in this Notes on Nationalism, he talks about another idea, namely transferred nationalism, and that is actually even more interesting, I think. And transferred nationalism is like an exported nationalism. It is someone, and I think you can generally think about a multiculturalist here to have an idea about what a transferred nationalist is about. It's about someone who is as interested in, who is a nationalist, but not here, not on part of his own culture and nation, but on part of a culture or nation overseas.
Right.
That's the transferred nationalism. Or he has, in a sense, he has exported his sentimental, nationalistic, romantic ideas. He has sunk his personality, as Orwell talks about. It's a very nice expression. He has sunk his personality, not in Britain or in Sweden or in Denmark, but maybe in Syria or in Mongolia or any culture on the other side of the planet, overseas, so to speak. So Orwell says that the interesting thing is here, according to Orwell, is that a classic nationalist and a transferred nationalist, they have so many things in common, and the only difference Orwell claims is geographic. They are both sentimental, they are both romantic, they both have a pessimistic worldview, but the only difference is that one is like idealizing his own nation, but the transferred nationalist is idealizing a nation overseas. So that's very interesting.
So let me link here, as I was perusing quickly through at least the intro of your book. I haven't had a chance to fully read it yet, but I will. I try to draw links with some other folks who've written about what struck me as things that are very relevant to your book. I can certainly start with my own most recent book, where I talk about progressive self-flagellation, right? So for me to truly be pious in the progressive calculus, I must look inwards and demonstrate how bad I am. So instead of original sin in a Christian sense, there is the original sin of being born in the West, of maybe having white skin and so on. So there's that. The other ones that I pulled out, and then I'll mention them all, and then you tell me how they link to your thesis and how they may be different potentially. There,
Right.
and when I saw you talking about the infatuation of the exotic, it reminded me of something that I've cited before. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau's noble savage, right? You are fetishizing, the other. So it's contrary to being racist, contrary to being to otherizing someone. They are exotic. They are noble. They are noble people of color, whereas us whites are evil and tainted and so on. Bertrand Russell had a great, and I actually cite this in The Parasitic Mind, he had a wonderful essay on the superior virtue of the oppressed. And then finally, Pascal Bruckner, I don't know if you know this gentleman, he has a book titled, it seems to me very relevant to your book, The Tyranny of Guilt, an essay on Western masochism.
Exactly.
So how do you link all these to your thesis?
Well, I think you're like hitting the nail on all aspects here, Gerd, and I think the Rousseau on the idealization of things overseas and the primitivism among Western intellectuals is extremely interesting. And you can ask yourself, why are they going on like this?
Yes.
Why can't they be at least a little bit content about all the virtues and all the things that they have been given by virtue of being born in Canada or in Sweden? Why are they going on, attacking everything that people are basically escaping and risking their lives to obtain? It doesn't somehow make sense. And I don't know, any guess is good as another. But I think that one of the reasons why they go on like this, harassing or flogging their backs, like you also talk about in your brilliant book, is because they somehow are ashamed of all the privileges that they have, and they want to find somehow a way out of this, out of the guilt of being privileged, out of the guilt of having so many fortunes and having so many privileges, and a much better life than people, for instance, in Yemen or people in Lebanon today, for instance.
So let me stop you here. So could it be, so to build on what you just said, could it be that I'm speaking now as the guilt-ridden Westerner, the prototype of the Westerner, not as Saad. Because I am born with a greater upper hand by virtue of me being in a first world country that has rules and laws and opportunities. There is a narrative that comes partly from social constructivism, partly from cultural relativism, which are idea pathogens that I discussed in The Parasitic Mind, that basically says that if you and I don't have equality of outcomes, it could only be due because I benefited from something along the way, or I oppressed you along the way. In other words, there is no possibility. Like, Lionel Messi couldn't be a better soccer player because he's innately born biologically as a better player than Göran could ever hope to be. It must be because he got an unfair advantage. His mother hugged him too much. She didn't hug him enough. So then the Western mind thinks as follows. I have advantages that the Yemeni doesn't have. Therefore, it must have been gotten in an inappropriate manner. Therefore, I must apologize for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's very true, and I appreciate your reference to football. I happen to know that you used to be a very good football player.
Thank you, sir.
No, I think that's part of it. It's like it's a zero-sum game. If Lionel Messi is a good football player, it's somehow as if he took my ability to be a good football player away from me. He stole it from me. So I have the reason to be envious, and I have a reason to be angry with Lionel Messi. Or, the best tennis player in the world. I can't watch them and enjoy it. I watch them and I hate them because they stole my Wimbledon title from me. And so we are witnessing a completely new way of dealing with I shouldn't call it hierarchies, but maybe the fact that we are good at some things, we are good at writing books, and we are not so good at other things. But it's like everything is infused with guilt, and from the other side, everything is infused with envy and aggression and anger and frustration. So it's like the whole identity politics, which is a huge idea, the multicultural entourage. It's like it's like creating a world which is a nightmare from hundreds of angles. So the simple thing as watching a theater play or watching, a great movie or watching tennis players, it is no longer filled with pleasure but envy. And there's another thing here I think is very interesting, namely the fact that if it's also part of the whole guilt thing. If Sweden is a prosperous country and Yemen is not a prosperous country, it is not. You can't see it like the old socialists and left-wingers did, as if there are structures and there are historical circumstances here that made Sweden a good country, and anybody who would go to Sweden would eventually be part of it. But it has to do with individuals. So the fact that Sweden is a prosperous country means that any Swede is better, and people in Yemen or people in Ethiopia or people in Lebanon these days are worse people. So if you say that Sweden is a prosperous country and we are fortunate, the politically correct, they are pointing fingers at you and they say, oh, so you're a racist. So the left-wingers today, this is, I think, a very important point to make. They have forgotten all about structures and systems, the old classic sociologist and left-wing explanation that it is not about individuals. We are part of a structure, we are part of a system, and, anybody who would be in Sweden for a long time would probably be part of it. So it's also, that's also, I think, a reason why a lot of left-wingers are entering this self-flagellation game, because they think that if I acknowledge the fact that I'm privileged, I'm also pointing fingers at every single person in, for instance, Thailand or Vietnam, saying you are inferior to me. Right. I'm superior. So any kind of acknowledgement of good fortune is like infused with racism these days. And the funny thing, the irony here is that the people who are going on most ferociously about this, with this bullshit, are the left-wingers. They have forgotten everything about, they are now so focused about the individualist explanations for this, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
This annoys me a lot, actually.
So I don't know if in your latest book, you went into sort of a historical account of maybe other societies or other time periods that have had this. So maybe let's talk about this. So typically, in my case, when I was talking about self-flagellation, I linked it, say, to certain religious contexts where, let's say, there are certain flagellants in Catholicism that will, self-flagellate because they're not pious enough, because they had some sinful thought or did a sinful deed. But I certainly can't remember, and maybe you'll correct me if you know better, I can't remember that manifestation of self-flagellation, guilt-ridden self-flagellation at the societal level. And if it has happened in the past, I would think that such a society is now extinct, because it seems impossible for a society to flourish and grow if it has such poor sense of its values, of its beauty, right? I mean, societies flourish. I mean, think of it another way. An individual who goes to see a therapist and says, I'm guilt-ridden, I'm self-loathing, I'm full of self-disgust, the therapist is going to try to work through that. It's not a beautiful thing to be self-loathing as an individual, but yet when we take it to the collectivist level, it is now a beautiful virtue to be self-loathing for the West. So have there been other societies that have suffered from this malady? And if not, why now the West? Why haven't previous people been as nutty as the West?
Well, I don't know. I think you talked about the link to Christianity and the religious idea of self-flagellation. I think that's a very interesting comment, because what we're witnessing today are left-wingers who pretend to have no connection whatsoever to Christianity, and yet I think that their attitude to their own society is like completely saturated with religious emotions, even though they wouldn't recognize it, namely to hate themselves and to, the self-flagellation attitude and self-harassment and self-denigration, etc. So that's a very important point to make. So I think what we're witnessing now in many ways is that the religion is like somehow creeping back and dressed up as the kind of decent left-wing self-critical attitude, which is, I think, is completely being exaggerated and completely going astray. But on the other idea about a society where you are just simply attacking yourself all the time, I'm not sure I agree with you, because I thought a lot about that when I wrote my book, and about societies and civilizations harassing itself all the time. And I was wondering, what is that really about? I mean, on the surface, you could say it seems to be very gentle and very kind and very tolerant and excessively tolerant, because I thought this will lead to the downfall of the whole system if you go on like that. And migration, etc., and giving up your own culture, giving up your own values, and the modernity and all the rest of it, and equality between men and women, etc. But then I thought maybe there's a hidden somehow claw here. There's a hidden agenda going on, and I write about that in parts of the book. And it's the fact that if you realize that, I mean, if you think about what the West are doing, we talk happily about. For instance, people in Somalia, they are so proud. They are so proud. It's wonderful because Somalis, they are so proud. We are not allowed to say that Norwegians are proud. If you say that, people will say, well, do you think you're something? You think you're better than other people?
No, you're a white supremacist. If you're white and you say you're proud, that is a telltale sign of white supremacy.
White supremacy, so that's dangerous. But we are happy to address people, cultures overseas like Somalis or people in Syria. They are so proud. They are so proud and happy about their own culture, etc. And then you think and I thought that maybe we do that in order to cover up a pretty dark reality, namely Somalis might not have that much to be proud of. So maybe the fact that we think that people should be proud and happy about their own culture, maybe it's a sign of the opposite. And then I thought also that I was wondering, what is the engine behind progress? And the engine behind progress in any society is probably never to be satisfied with what you're doing in terms of cars, in terms of technology, in terms of women's rights, in terms of equality between men and women. And then I thought maybe there's really some hidden agenda going on here, some arrogance that people don't seem to realize. And I don't think Pascal Bruckner, you mentioned his excellent book, I don't think he talks about that, namely the fact that this lack of self-esteem, this self-hatred, maybe somehow is linked to some kind of, I don't know, subconscious awareness or some kind of idea whereby you realize that in order to excel, in order to move forward, you have to be dissatisfied with what you're doing,
right.
Dissatisfied with your culture, dissatisfied with the air quality, and dissatisfied with everything. So maybe that's something that's going on under the surface here. So that the lack of this is kind of, you might even put it like this: maybe there's an arrogance under the surface of the lack of arrogance.
Right. I get that. Yeah, that makes sense.
There's a pride. There is a self-haughtiness under the lack of it, because that if Swedish people, if we, like 100 years ago, if we would have walked about saying we're so happy, we're so proud of our society, then you could just sit down under a tree and do nothing. So, you know what I mean? So maybe that kind of
but
idea.
Your point about the arrogance is let me build on that. So, I was approached, and I mentioned this briefly in The Parasitic Mind. I was approached by a group, a women's club at my business school that apparently they were fans of my work, and they wanted me to speak at one of their luncheons or events, whatever it was, about how I had been an ally to women in my career. And I responded in the usual inimitable style of Saad. I said, well, I haven't been an ally to women. I am an ally to women, to men, to tall people, to short people, to purple people, to green people. I am an ally to everyone who is worthy of my attention. Because I argued to the lady in question, who was very lovely and very polite and very respectful, I argued that isn't it infantilizing, and isn't it a form of truly coddling? It's insulting that women need me to serve as their allies. And then I reminded the person in question that my dean is a woman, the chair of my department is a woman, the associate dean is a woman. So why is it that they need the big hero? I mean, isn't that what sexism would be? So you see how all of these progressive ideologies are many things, but they're certainly not internally consistent from a logical perspective, right? Because it's like benevolent sexism. I don't know if you know this concept, Göran. So the typical type of sexism, we all know it, and we reject it, right? You speak inappropriately to a woman, you harass her, and so on. So that's called hostile sexism. But radical feminists were not happy with just the negative instantiation of sexism. So they then argued that when you are galant, you're chivalrous, you open the door to a woman. If she's being attacked, you go to save her. Those are forms of benevolent sexism. So imagine you're walking on the street and you see 3 guys raping a woman. So now I have to think, should I just walk away? Would that be more virtuous? Because if I intervene and save her, then I am being sexist. And so you see how these ideological parasitic ideas cause confusion. I mean, it's as simple as that.
That's I think that's like the highway to lesbianism, because I mean, what are we guys supposed to do? It's not easy to be a man these days. Right. I mean, if you do nothing, they will help you. They will hate you for it, and if you try to help them, they hate you for it. So it's you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Kafka trap.
I think, you know what I think? I've over the last maybe 6 months or about last year, I would say, I've had a hard time engaging in these discussions. I mean, your book goes through so many of them, because I think that the whole discussion has recently become so silly and unbelievably ridiculous. So it's like people are talking about like flat Earth society, and you want to find counter arguments to flat Earth society, to the fact that the Earth is flat, or to the fact that I don't know, and then I just think, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? I mean, I'm an intellectual. I try to. I've written books. This is so ridiculous.
Are you unable to get a lot of folks within Sweden? Which, of course, we've talked about this 4 years ago when you were on the show. Sweden is kind of the epicenter of patient zero of ostrich parasitic syndrome. So are you truly a pariah in Sweden? Have you made any headway since 2017? Have you become more heretical? Where are you on the continuum of I hate Göran Adamson?
Well, the funny thing is that there are trends in all kinds of directions. But one thing I'd like, it seems to be like there is an increasing polarization. I think we talked about this last time also, that the people who support me, people who are waking up, like supporting you and me, and scientifically minded people are growing. But then it seems like the multicultural entourage is somehow shrinking, but it's also getting more ferocious because they are producing increasingly nutty ideas.
Yeah.
So, it's like there is a very nice expression in English, we don't have it in Swedish, namely that the floor is caving in. The floor under the middle ground is caving in. So it's like when I remember when I was 20 years old, you could talk to Marxists, you could talk to socialists, you could talk to anybody, and you could have and very quickly you could reach some kind of common ground. Maybe it was the size of a stamp, but you could reach some kind of agreement, or at least you understood that you were talking about the same things, even though you disagreed. But now it's like the left wingers or the identity politicians, they are getting so fanatic and so emotional. So the room for sane discussion is like almost vanishing. And as you also talk so eloquently about in your book, on many pages, is that the scientific discussion has been replaced, or is being replaced by emotionalism. Yeah. So could you possibly elaborate a little on that? I mean, I have a lot of citations here, but if you just
thank you. You're very, very kind of you. So in the book, I talk about the false dichotomy between thinking versus feeling, right? The idea being that there are many, and I call this epistemological dichotomania. Epistemological dichotomania is the desperate desire to always create mutually exclusive dichotomies, whereas in many cases it's simply a false dichotomy. So for example, nature versus nurture is a false dichotomy, because all things of nurture are due to nature, right? We are not socialized the way we are outside of biology. We are socialized in these ways precisely because of biology. So I take this principle and I argue that the idea of thinking versus feeling, are humans a thinking animal or a feeling animal, is wrong. But rather, what matters is when do you deploy which system in which context. So if I'm walking down a dark alley to get home and I see 4 young men loitering around suspiciously, my heart will start racing, my blood pressure increases. That fear-based response, which is an emotional response, makes perfect evolutionary sense. On the other hand, if I'm trying to solve a calculus problem, triggering my affective system is not going to help me much. I need to trigger my cognitive system. So when it comes to matters of science, your affective system is irrelevant. So there are contexts for our emotions to carry us, but there are other contexts, like in science, where what matters is a deontological commitment to the pursuit of truth unencumbered by your feelings. I don't give a damn what your feelings are to some research project that I've done. Not because I'm a mean person, but because when I am tasked with the objective of pursuing truth, that's my task. I don't modulate that in order to not hurt your feelings, right? So, but of course, as you know, in the social sciences, we can't study sex differences, or actually we could study sex differences as long as the finding comes out in support of women being superior on whatever we're studying. If the results come out that men are superior on this memory task, well, then you're a Nazi.
Yeah, don't do it. You know, here's one. I just want to bring up one quote from your book. You say the domains that are reserved for the intellect are hijacked by feelings. Yeah. And this is precisely what plagues the universities these days. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, we are both engaged and we are both struggling in the universities. And that's exactly the problem here. That I mean, it's like if I go back to 30 years and I would say that, well, I have this equation here and the result is 3. Nobody would even consider being abused or humiliated by it. I mean, it's pure science. But now, I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but it is not completely. You can actually imagine that someone might even be abused by a purely scientific discovery because it is not according to their political conviction. No?
Oh, Göran, that's already happened. Probably around the time that you came on the show a few years ago, I satirically released a clip. Again, satirically, although I deliver it in such a way that if you don't know about my stuff, you actually think I'm being serious. I released a clip where I announced to the world that I had founded a new discipline because I have a mathematics background. Social justice mathematics. And so, for example, we need to ban the term irrational numbers because that marginalizes people with mental health issues. And so I just went through the whole, bullshit stuff. And by the way, I get emails from mathematicians, professional mathematicians who say, you're our hero. We sit there and watch these clips and crack up. Well, guess what? A few years later, it is now an actual field whereby people argue, usually in ethnic studies and black studies and the women's studies, that mathematics is a form of white supremacy. So that which was satirical 3-4 years ago in my clip is now being taught in university. So we're already there.
It's I don't know what to say. Are you familiar with the British comedy group Monty Python?
I am.
Yes. That's my standard joke when I talk to friends and when I write comments on Facebook, that we are well beyond John Cleese. You don't need to stream any Monty Python. You could just open your eyes and read the newspaper.
So true.
Or go to your job at the university and just have lunch with some colleagues and then hear what they are talking about. No, I don't know. I don't know. It's like. That also leads over to another thing that you mentioned in your book quite a lot, and I also refer to it, namely that when emotions are when science is being pushed aside by emotions, that then it's no longer about having the best ideas. It's about emotions, and then you win the debate not by being clever but being heartbroken.
Or he who emotes louder wins the argument, right?
Yes.
He who is the greater victim, he who is most hurt, right?
Yes.
So there is no way to get at an either axiomatic truth or an empirical truth. I scream and cry, you scream louder, you win.
Yes, and that is also, if you just go back, if you back the tape like 40 years when I was a teenager. I mean, you were also a teenager, even though you're a bit younger than I think. Because at the time when you talked about these things, it was, you need to cut here because I actually lost completely what I was about to say.
Oh, just keep going. Don't worry about it.
But it was something very, very important. Bloody hell, this was excellent.
Oh, it'll come back to you. Why don't we keep going, and then if it comes back to you, you could interrupt me. How's that?
No, wait, but what did you just say? You said something. It was like, and then I thought, for God's sake, what is it? What did you just say? My mind went blank.
Just before, not. You know what? We don't even need to cut it. This is part of the organic nature of beautiful conversations, right? We're just sitting at a cafe, so don't worry about it. It'll come back to you. Don't worry. Well, actually, I wanted to ask you a personal question. In your book, I'm sure you've never been asked this question yet. I love looking at people's dedications in their books. So in my case, hold on. Don't say anything. Don't give it away. In my book, so my first book, it was to Annie, my Hokis. Hokis in Armenian. She's Lebanese Armenian. Hokis means my soul. My second book, it was to Amar and Samra, my eternal companions. It's my two Belgian shepherds. Then I had a book to my daughter, to Luna Bahabbik. Her name is Luna. Bahabbik means I love you in Arabic. And then my last book, Parasitic Mind, it's to Lior Bahabbak. Lior is my son. And I say I love you to him. And then my family always jokes. They say, well, who are you gonna dedicate the next book to now that you've covered everybody in the family? Right. And in your case, you dedicated the book to some folks in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia who make the greatest coffee in the world or something. Tell us that story. There's a gold nugget there. Please tell us why you did that.
Yeah, this was back in 2010. And this is actually, interestingly enough, the way I sometimes start talking about when I'm interviewed. This is how I begin the conversation because I was sitting there at Ras Hotel, which happens to be the origin, they say, of Rastafari.
Right, nice.
Yeah, that's a hotel in Addis Ababa, in downtown Addis Ababa. And I was sitting there among the smog, and I was thinking about the idea of nationalism. And then I just thought, well, couldn't there be something which is completely opposite of nationalism? And this brings me back to the beginning of our conversation. And I thought maybe there could be something called negative nationalism. And then I just Googled it. And then it just, bam! And then there was the word negative nationalism. It was a subtitle in an essay, and you already know it. I've already explained it.
Of course.
Told it, which is very, a very, very silly thing to do. But anyway, it was an essay by George Orwell, of course, by the name of Notes on Nationalism. And then I thought, well, this is very interesting. So that's actually the start of my book. When I read this essay and I came across negative nationalism and also the even more interesting concept of transferred nationalism, exported nationalism. But what I didn't mention before at the beginning of our conversation was that I tried to combine these two types of nationalism, namely negative nationalism and transferred nationalism, into my concept, which is then masochistic nationalism, namely a kind of completely fictitious self-hatred, because this masochistic nationalistic attitude only exists in societies in the West, societies which are by and large, very, very prosperous and do not have any real problems. So it's a fictitious attitude whereby you hate your own country just like you watch a horror movie and have some popcorn, It is not based on real struggle. It's not based on real famines or hardship, because we all know that people who live under circumstances which are, really troublesome, they don't walk about boasting about it. Of course they don't do. So the whole self-hating attitude is a characteristic among a certain kind of privileged middle-class intellectuals, left-leaning middle-class intellectuals, who somehow feel ashamed or somehow find it unappealing to be privileged, and so they find this kind of a strange way to get out of their sense of shame of being privileged by by downplaying or abusing their own fortunes in this manner. And I'd like to bring back to George Orwell, because he in this Notes on Nationalism he refers to the British intellectuals. He says, if I'm not mistaken, he says something like this. This was about, he referred to the war, Second World War. He says that of course the British intellectuals, they didn't wish the Nazis to win the war, and then he continues. Still, they could not help getting a certain kick when they saw the British Air Force were shot down over Berlin and Dresden. They couldn't help getting a certain kick of the British soldiers being abused and killed, you know. And I think this idea of getting a certain kick is very interesting because I think it has to do with a kind of masochistic. You enter a game, it's not real. It's just like a sexual idea of masochism. You enter a game and you're abused by the sadist, and you love it. You know, it makes you aroused and deeply satisfied, etc. And you know, it fuels your, I don't know, but it's a kind of the masochistic nationalism, in my interpretation, is a kind of the sexual masochism writ large as a collectivist sentiment in an entire culture or an entire state, where people, I think, and I think Sweden is a very good case in point here, where people are walking about, not people, but you know, the left-wing elites in the media, they are walking about harassing their own culture, even though there's nothing behind it. You know, it's just like a pastime activity, and
well, just yesterday, to strengthen the thesis of your book, yesterday I weighed in on social media because I saw a New York Times editorial board member who had posted a tweet. She's a noble person of color who had posted a tweet saying that she was in Long Island and she was very, very traumatized and disgusted because she saw these really obnoxious big US flags, and that had caused her great concern. And so, I mean, I think that's a perfect manifestation of your masochistic nationalism, because when it becomes something triggering to have your own country's flag flying proudly, and that's something that causes you great angst, we've entered the singularity point of masochistic nationalism, no?
I couldn't put it better than that. And you know, it's a singularity point of, that's actually what it's about. And then, you know, I need to tell you a story, because when I was starting writing this book, me and my wife, we went to Istanbul. And I tried to persuade her, and she's a bit hard. She works for the United Nations, so she's not so easily convinced about my ideas generally. But we were sitting there in a boat, and I tried to explain to her, you know, what this masochistic idea is about. And then suddenly I saw a big flagship sitting there in the harbor in Istanbul. I don't know, maybe they were passing through, etc. And then I pointed at the ship. And I said, there you go, that's actually what I mean. She said, what do you mean? Do you see the flag on the ship? I said, do you see the flag? And she said, no. Well, that's my explanation, because there was actually a flag on that flagship, and it was so small, it was maybe, you know, 50 times 50 centimeters. It was the smallest flag you could imagine. And then I pointed, and eventually she saw it, and then I told her, you know, that's what I mean. That's a masochistic nationalism. Why on earth? I mean, the size of that flag is so small. It has, you know, they must have thought, because we are Swedes and we don't want to flag our pride, so we must have thought a lot about that. And eventually they decided to make it so small that nobody would notice it.
Amazing. I mean,
so the size. Sorry.
And now the self-loathing can manifest itself at different, if you like, units of analysis. So it could be at the societal level or at the national level. I hate myself because I'm American. I'm evil. I'm a Westerner. It could be at the skin color level. I am horrible. I am a white person. It could be at the sexual preference level. I am a disgusting heterosexual, right? Noble people are more sexually fluid. Only bigots would prefer. So, for example, I put out a apology tweet a few years ago where I apologized for my inherent transphobia, because by marrying my wife, I was implicitly presuming that I wanted to mate with someone who was a woman and had a vagina, because I didn't realize that women come in many forms. Some women have 9-inch penises, and so I was being transphobic. And so despite the fact that I now created several children with this woman, I do apologize for my transphobia. But so in other words, the orgiastic, masochistic self-loathing is not just at the national level, as you describe in your book. It can be broken down into many other areas of self-loathing, correct?
Yes, that's very true. But I need to tell you, I think your satire is too sophisticated for a lot of the people you criticize. You know,
that's why I don't get canceled. That's why I don't get canceled.
But I think that's like, by definition, if they would understand what you say, they wouldn't be so silly, you know. So it makes perfect sense, and I'm struggling with that thing too. You know, sometimes you're very sarcastic, and precisely the people you're mocking, they don't understand it, which is sometimes very nice. Otherwise, they would kill you for it.
Because I fly under the radar. Because people always, I often get, how come you could survive? How come you don't get canceled? I say, well, first. Look at this infectious smile. Who could eradicate this guy? But then I tell them usually that my satire fools all these idiots, because I even in the book, in The Parasitic Mind, I list several examples where I fooled major media companies. So one of them, which I discuss in the book, had put out a article of the top, I can't remember how many, like the top 10 dumbest things said in 2018, and I had made it at number 4 or 5, whatever it was, but it was a satirical tweet. I was basically arguing national borders are racist, only a Nazi country would have borders, and so they took this, put it, and said, look at how dumb professors are, look at this idiot. So then I write to them, I say, oh, by the way, it was satirical. Oops. So then right away they go back and they change it without even putting an editing, comment, because they felt so embarrassed by it. So that's, I think, one of the ways by which I don't get canceled, because my satire fools the idiots.
Yeah, under the radar. Yes, of course.
Under the radar.
God, let me just bring up something from your book here.
Sure.
Get Wilders. You mentioned Get
sure.
Wilders in your book. And you can think anything you want about Get Wilders, but there's a principle here, namely that you can say true things and you can lie. You can be what you're saying, or rather, what you're saying can be criminal or it might not be criminal. As I remember, he was referring to the fact that in Holland there were some areas where there were a lot of migrants, and the situation in these areas were not the best, and he was criticizing the migration policy. And then he was attacked by politicians. Could you just elaborate a little bit?
Oh, yes.
I think that's possibly the most shocking thing I saw in your book, and it actually blew my mind. I couldn't read for like 15 minutes. So can you please just tell me about it?
You're very kind to ask this. Look, Geert Wilders is yes, certainly a divisive politician to many people, certainly people on the left and so on, because he has a very, very direct style of speaking when it comes to, immigration, when it comes to immigration from certain countries that don't necessarily share the values of the Netherlands. And so at one point he had made some statements that caused him to be prosecuted. And when he was defending himself, he basically argued, okay, well, can I bring some experts to demonstrate that the veracity of my position? In other words, that which I said is true, right? And the magistrate, in truly a manifestation of grand Orwellian nightmare, said, it doesn't matter if what you say is true. So truth is not a defense, because if the consequences of you uttering this is that it's hateful or it can marginalize someone, then you're still guilty of it. So when a society cannot even use truth as a defense, it's a society that's going to die. So that's the example, and thank you for bringing it up.
Yes, that's a very eloquent explanation of the whole thing. And I thought about it on the way here to our discussion. I thought about it, and I thought maybe you can turn this around to further elaborate and show the truly the totalitarian or Orwellian, to say the least, implication of that example. Namely, if you, instead of talking about Geert Wilders, you talk about someone who is very, very sweet, very, very PC, very, very kind and tolerant, according to all of these parameters, according to the multicultural entourage. And then you would come up with something completely opposite. Namely, you could say that if that person says something, it doesn't really matter whether it is true or not. It will always be legal. It will always be fostered. Right. You can be very provocative and say that even if this person would rape a couple of women or put 100 cars on fire or do whatever they want, it would still be legal, because the person who is doing this is a nice guy.
Exactly.
You see?
Well,
so isn't that a way that you just turn the whole thing around?
Absolutely.
And then you elaborate with the same bizarre tools, and then you come up with the same logic from the other end. Namely, it will always be legal. You can be complete nihilist. You can put the dagger in Saad and you're an Adamson or 100 people. Well, it's fine.
Well, listen, there is an exact example of that I discuss in the book. It's a story that had happened to Sam Harris, where he is having a discussion with at the time, I think the bioethicist serving on President Obama's advisory board or whatever. And she was very much of I think it was a she, very much of a cultural relativist, right? Who are we to judge other cultures? And so Sam had basically said to her, I'm paraphrasing, the exact quote is in the book. He says something like, so let's suppose I told you there was a society whereby they say every fourth child we have to gouge their eyes so that they can walk in darkness forevermore. Would you condemn that? And she said, well, not necessarily, because it depends if that's their cultural or religious values. So when a human being, never mind a bioethicist, when a human being does not have the internal moral compass or calculus to say, no, you could never gouge out the eyes of an innocent child under any circumstance. If she doesn't have the capacity to enunciate that very natural deontological position, it shows you what an idea pathogen cultural relativism is, because it basically negates our instinct to recognize what is right or wrong. And this is why, by the way, Göran, I talk about the difference between deontological ethics and consequentialist ethics. And again, I argue that it is wrong to pit them against each other. Sometimes consequentialism works. And the example I use in a humorous manner, but it's true. I say, look, if you want to have a long marriage, when your spouse says, do I look fat in those jeans? Then quickly put on your consequentialist hat and say, of course you don't, you're gorgeous. Because in this case, I am lying, but I'm lying to protect the sanctity of our union. I'm lying so that I can protect your emotions. On the other hand, when I am pursuing truth, I only put on my deontological hat. I never equivocate truth to protect your feelings.
No, that's very true. That's very, very true. No, I think the cultural relativism or postmodernity, multiculturalism is one big bag of very dangerous ideas, and it leads to laziness, it leads to arrogance, and all of these things. But one thing I'd like to mention here is that, yes, they keep saying that, they have their ideas, they have their convictions. And my question is, who? You say they have their ideas. Well, that's a bloody stereotype, isn't it? It's like saying that people who live in a certain country, well, just maybe because they are escaping from this country, they are fleeing to Canada, to Germany, to Sweden. Maybe there are inner tensions in these countries. Right. And it's like, no, they didn't understand it. Well, I can tell you, of course there are inner tensions. That's why they try to run away. And so the inner tensions are possibly between the elites and the people. Or you can also say that there might be tensions between a medical doctor who are trying to what do you say, gouge the eyes out of young children, and the children who would like to keep their eyes to be happy, And so it's like this is my constant attack against the cultural relativists. It's like saying, because what they're actually talking about when they say that they have their cultures, They are talking about the elites. They are talking about people in power in these cultures,
exactly.
in these religions. And whereas they seem to leave the truly destitute, truly poor people in jail in China, for instance, or children or women, for that matter,
sure.
in certain religions, they leave them completely to their destiny. So I think there is a very strange arrogance and very strange upper class arrogance among cultural relativists. They seem to be very happy to bond with the elites in poor countries, and then they are claiming to be tolerant and understanding and open-minded, etc. I think it's a terrible, just complete nonsense. And when you say this, when I say this to my students, when I talk about cultural relativism and I bring up this elitist implications in cultural relativism, they just look at me. And I just tell them, you need to think about this.
Right.
When we say they have their customs, are you talking about people in jail? In Iran, for instance? No, you never talk about, this is not what you mean when you talk about they. You talk about the mullahs.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And then the mullahs, what do you think the mullahs, what do you think the ruling elites in dictatorships, what do you think they say when they listen to cultural relativists in the West? They are so happy they can't stop laughing.
Well, listen, I get access to these positions because given that Arabic is my mother tongue, yes, I can converse with people in Arabic when they don't necessarily know who I am or now it's becoming a bit more difficult to fly under the radar, but yes, historically, as I was, developing as a young adult and so on, I would get access to the things that folks would say that they wouldn't be saying to the Westerner, right?
No.
And the typical position, and this might sound a bit crass, the typical position that I would often hear from people who come from my neck of the woods in the Middle East is that they're astonished at, there's kind of a vulgar term in Arabic, it's like they are mounting the West, mounting in a sexual way, right? Is that they can't believe how weak the West is in using its system. They're using those systems to mount the West. It's kind of difficult to translate into English.
I understand exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is again part of my book. The masochistic attitude, and then people are coming from. Speak up. We can say multiculturalism behind the lines. It's mostly about Islam, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about Hindus. It's not about Vietnamese people. That's the thing we often talk about. And then the funny thing is that you see these academics or Westerners by and large who are, filled with a sense of tolerance and humbleness, etc. And then you have, not all of them, of course, but a fair amount of Muslims and Islamists certainly who just walk in, and they are not filled with postmodernity. They are filled with the opposite. They are filled with a tremendously, self-esteem bordering on a diagnosis. And then you imagine the who's supposed to win? Who will win this battle? I don't know. This is a battle between a kind of civilized, perversely civilized attitude versus a very rough, very solid, very outspoken, self-assured attitude.
Yeah.
And the clash here is extremely bizarre because it's not like a conflict between equals. It's like very strange, very bizarre. And again, I'd like to bring up the funny thing which goes on here, namely the claw, you might say, as I mentioned before, behind this self-humiliation, namely a kind of some kind of subconscious belief in the superiority of your culture because you're progressing, you're self-critical. You always want to excel. You're never satisfied. You always say, this is not good enough. This is not good enough. And then you're confronted with people who keep saying, we are proud, everything is fantastic, and who are happy, it seems, to sit down and take it easy and have a coffee for 5 hours, which is, of course, not a recipe for success. It's not a recipe for GDP growth. It's like the opposite. And yet these people are, the poor people, the people who are actually the destitute, they are furious. And we who are, if you allow this stereotype, we and them, we who are superior in many ways, as societies, we are filled with this kind of self-flagellation that maybe it makes sense somehow, but it's very intricate, I would say.
It's a perverse dance. It's a perverse dance, definitely.
Very perverse dance. And the conflicts are like so bizarre, and the intellectual puzzle is like, I have no clue how to solve it.
Göran, last question on Masochistic Nationalism, your latest book, and then I want to spend the next few minutes talking about stuff in sociology in general.
Yes.
So in the last chapter of my book, I try to leave off the journey with some hope, with a call to action, because there's no point in diagnosing the disease. But you go see your physician and he says you've got disease X, and then you say, okay, doc, so what do we do? He goes, oh, I don't care, I don't know, I'm just going to tell you that you have the. So it was very important for me to offer a set of prescriptions or calls to action. So in your book, and forgive me because I haven't gotten that far yet, you provide this excellent sort of diagnosis of some of these issues. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is there optimism? Is there somehow to get out of this, or you didn't get into that?
Yes, actually, my editor, Routledge, he said, this is a grim story. It's good, but you need to have some way out of this. You need to have a light at the end of the tunnel, and the light at the end of the tunnel is actually liberalism. Funnily enough, it's
true liberalism, classical liberalism.
Yes, it's not. Sorry, Hillary, it's not your kind of liberalism. It's true liberalism, right. Because what I'm trying to do throughout the book, I'm trying to say that look, there is a strange similarity between the what we refer to as a classic nationalist and what I call a masochistic nationalist, namely a nationalist overseas. They say the same thing. The only difference is geographic. One is hailing his own country. The other one is hailing the left-wingers, the multiculturalists. They are hailing cultures overseas.
Watch it. Be careful with your microphone. It's making static. Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes. So they are basically doing the same thing. And what is very important here is to say that neither of these two nationalists are interested in principles.
Right.
They talk about their own culture, their own nation, beaming with righteousness and pessimism and aggressiveness. And we can do things you are not allowed to do.
Right.
But then the multiculturalists, they say something which seems to me to be the opposite, and yet the same. They can do things to us. We can't do anything to them.
Right.
So they have no political principles. They are basically, both of them are saying, we can do anything we want, and you should shut up.
Right.
Because you're not good enough, So from different geographical settings, they are saying the same thing. That's a very important point. So I'm fusing these two, saying this is like two manifestations of a nationalist attitude. Yeah, the classic and the masochistic manifestation of nationalism. And so my way out of this is a position whereby you actually stick to a political principle, namely saying we have a right to be engaged and be proud and happy with our own nation, without, of course, not being excessive about it, but we have a right to be proud about our culture. And they also have a right to be proud about their culture, And it's like we assign the rights to be happy and to be proud and to wave our flags, and we think this is a universal right. And just to bring on to another chapter in my book, it's about art. If you say that you're in favor of freedom of the arts, you cannot say, like some nationalists would say, we like nationalist art, we like art favoring the white guy, or favoring the West. But multicultural art or art idealizing the Muslim world, for instance, is bad. You can't say that. You need to stick to a principle. And then you can turn the whole thing around and say, well, Muhammad cartoons should be fine. You can't criticize it, That's the other side of it.
Right.
You need to have a principle. If you say that freedom of the arts is good, you need to say that as a principle. You need to be completely disinterested of the local setting.
Right.
Because if you think the local setting is important, then you're just a nationalist. Then you think that we can say things that you're not allowed to say these things. And then I think the liberal attitude is the somehow the way out of this, because the liberal would not be interested in geography here. A liberal would say that, well, like John Stuart Mill or other ones, or I guess you or me, we would say that, well, if you stick to a rule, you need to you need to adhere to this rule universally,
right.
as a universal principle. So that's my very briefly.
So let me summarize what you just said. I mean, it's exactly what I said earlier when I drew the distinction between deontological ethics, absolute principles, and consequentialist. So you're basically saying be consistent in the application of deontological ethics. And I think one thing that maybe you didn't mention here, but maybe you mentioned in the book, because some people might not know what classical liberalism is. One of the things to get out of the darkness is that the most fundamental unit that either defines your pride or shame is the individual. It's individual dignity, right? So before Göran is white or Swedish, he is Göran. And therefore, I judge the merits and flaws of Göran based on that. The fact that he's Swedish is part of his identity and part of the trajectory of his history, but it is subsumed, or it is superseded by the unique constellation of who Göran is. So I am Gad Saad first before Lebanese or Jewish or Middle Eastern. And so if people are able to truly adhere to this principle, which is foundational to classical liberalism, I think there's a way out of all this collectivist bullshit.
I think that's exactly the way out of this collectivist bullshit, to focus the individual, because both the nationalists and in my view, the masochistic nationalists, they only focus the collectivist idea and the culture. And I mean, you can listen to multiculturalists for days,
right?
And they still would not mention the individual. The extent of their collectivism is mind-boggling. It's worse than a communist. It's worse than a Stalinist,
right.
you know? It's actually, if you want to pick the most collectivist ideology out there, it's actually multiculturalism, I think.
Right, yes, and people wouldn't think that as a first intuition. So in a sense, what you're saying is quite shocking to most people, right?
Yeah. Yes. But please, let's continue with what you were about to say.
Okay, so can we do about another 10 minutes? You think?
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
As long as you want, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, Göran. Two things I want to mention. First, so in the parasitic mind, I have a section where I talk about the distribution of professors in terms of their political affiliation. Are they? This is in the context of the U.S. and there's also similar studies in Canada, but I'm sure there are similar studies in Sweden. Are you? So let's do the American context. Are you a registered Democrat or a registered Republican as a professor? And it turns out that, exactly like many of us have been warning, the academy is just unbelievably lopsided towards one political group, the Democrats, and that ratio, that lopsided ratio, varies as a function of which discipline. So economics might be less lopsided than, and now I'm going to come to sociology. So the first thing that I want to talk about is a study this is Langbert 2018. He did a fantastic study looking at a whole bunch of disciplines. Sociology, let me just get the right number. Sociology faculty members, the ratio, now sit down for this one, 43.8 to 1. Mm-hmm. Right, so I mean, let's contextualize it. Typically in science, if you have something called an odds ratio of 1.2 to 1, meaning 20% more, 1.2 to 1, that's a powerful, statistically significant effect. 2 to 1 is huge. 3 to 1 is out of this world. 43.8 to 1. So 44 to 1. So how could you ever have sociology students understanding the full complexity of a phenomenon when the people who are entrusted with teaching our young minds are completely monopolistically from one group? And I suspect it's the same in Sweden, correct?
It's the same in Sweden, and interestingly enough, I was talking to some people today, and I said I would like to make a study about this. Within the social sciences, the extent of the left-wing, or you would say democratic tendency, to put it mildly, in the social sciences in Sweden, because it is mind-boggling. You can people have all kinds of ideas, but I wrote an article about actually 2 months ago or something, where I said, okay, but let's not be anecdotal about this. Let's just check the books, because I've been in this bullshit for 20 years. Let's just go through the books in the social sciences. Let's focus on anthropology, social work, and sociology to have a look, in the lion's den. And then see if you can find one book out of 1,000 which is not completely saturated, permeated with identity politics, gender politics, and all of it. In Sweden, it seems to me that the social sciences is one big voting factory for the left.
Exactly.
That's what's happening. Yeah, and an interesting thing here is that the universities. I mean, if you've read the history of the university, you know that the university once came about to create some kind of safe space, if you know what I mean. Safe space where people actually could argue freely, a space which was not contaminated by political ideas and the upper class and the establishment, where people could be clever, and have a scientific mind, and all ideas were fine. And I think what we're witnessing now is some kind of tragedy, because it seems like the university is like slowly sliding back to something we had prior to the 18th century.
Right. It's so true.
That's what's happening.
So are you running that study? Is it did you get a green light, or do you think you're going to do it?
No, but I will do it. I will actually do this. I'm thinking about it. I'm just finishing a book which might also be of interest to you. I'm finishing or writing on a book which is about a comparison between Sweden in the 2020s and Poland in the 1950s. Okay. In terms of the if you know Czesław Miłosz, he wrote a book called the Captured Mind, the Captive Mind. It's about the dissidents and also the opportunists in Warsaw and in Poland in the 1950s, and the way they justified their lack of independency and the way they collaborated with the communist regime, and also, interestingly enough, the way they attacked, the way they abused and dealt with dissidents. And now I see in Sweden in the 2020s, I see these ideas are coming back. We have Sweden is slowly moving towards. You shouldn't exaggerate it, but I think Sweden is slowly moving towards a kind of dictatorship, because we have an elite and dealing with people like myself and a lot of other people who just try to be scientific. And the way we are being dealt with, it does not seem to me to be a democratic way of dealing with people. But anyway, I'm trying to. My next book I'm trying to write the next book about what we just talked about.
Interesting.
So that's
just one point of optimism coming out of Sweden. I was contacted by some Swedish scholars and scientists. I think they run. Is it called Academic Watch or something like that? I can't remember.
Yes, I know.
You know them, okay? And they wanted me to write an invited piece for them, and so there are some folks in Sweden, yourself of course, and others that are trying to push back against the lunacy. Okay, last set of questions that relate to sociology. So yes. Auguste Comte, many years ago, had written this treatise on the hierarchy of the sciences, and in his view, sociology was at the apex of the sciences, because he argued then that it's a lot easier to study natural phenomena, in the natural sciences, to study the behavior of an atom or a molecule, than it is to study something as complex as human beings and certainly as societies. And in a sense, he's correct. So you can certainly argue that sociology should be an important scientific discipline in line with any other discipline. And yet I've argued that because sociology is so prone to being parasitized by activist ideas, it actually ends up being a trash science, not because epistemologically speaking, it's not an actual science, but because it simply hasn't been inoculated against all the parasitic nonsense. So remember what I just said there, which then leads me to the next part, and then you'll answer in any way you want. So of course, in my own field, scientific field, what I've done in pioneering the field of evolutionary consumption is I've taken evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, and I apply it to study human behavior in general and consumer behavior in particular. And so many years ago, when I was writing my first book, I wanted to look at other disciplines that have had infusions of Darwinian thinking. And so I looked at sociology, and I only found a few books. Here's one. This is called Crisis in Sociology, The Need for Darwin. And there are several other books written by sociologists where they argue, how could you be studying sociological phenomena without ever recognizing the evolutionary mechanisms that generate behavior? And so, having said all that, where do you, I understand you're not an evolutionist, but how do you view this issue of how do we bring back sociology from the brinks of stupidity back to the sciences where it belongs?
God, this is a billion dollar question. But I need to start with a very sad, somehow sad recognition. If sociology is a trash science, then I fear I might be a trash science.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to be insulting.
No, but sometimes I feel a little bit like the odd man out. That's true. If there are two like myself in 88 sociologists, that's a pretty hard uphill battle. Yeah. But I think the problem with sociology is that in terms of the fact that it's been hijacked by parasitic ideas and I would say identity politics, is that the problem is it's so easy. If you take a science like a field like economics or a field like natural sciences and chemistry, it's much harder if you want to interpret maths like postmodernity. You can't. They try, but it's not as easy. But sociology is it's very easy to pervert sociology. It's very easy I think it's very easy to cover up sociology or cover up ideological manipulation as sociology. I think it's extremely easy, and it also it makes it even more easy because then you can also pretend to be not only a scientist but also an activist, and that appeals to a lot of students because they think, many of them, I think, maybe not the sharpest knives in the drawer, but many students, I think they think maybe science or sociology is a little bit boring, a little bit abstract, but then if you add a few drops of activism into it, and which means you make it into an ideology, you make it into you turn students into activists and to change the world, whatever it is, which means you make it less scientific. Then they are happy because they think they have a mission.
Very true.
And I think this is spreading a lot, as opposed to if you would engage in maybe a little bit harder social sciences like economics or management. Maybe it's not as easy. So I think that.
So let me build on that. So I'm often asked, how do I explain the fact that some disciplines are more parasitized than others? So to build on what you said, and my answer, actually using exactly the disciplines that you said. So I'm housed in a business school. Well, it's very difficult to build a mathematical model of consumer choice using postmodernism, because your model is either going to work or not. If I'm being paid a lot of money by a company to help them better understand consumer behavior, I can't be spewing nonsense because there is a thing called reality that will serve as a feedback loop to my stupidity. If you're building I'm sorry?
No, they won't buy it.
Exactly. And if I'm an engineer and I'm building a bridge, I can't use postmodernist physics to build the bridge. So engineering, business school are places that are so coupled to reality that, in a sense, epistemologically, you have an inoculation against the nonsense. Sociology doesn't have that inoculation, and so the craziness can go completely wild. Correct?
This could be the start of a completely new discussion. This is extremely interesting, and I think you're completely right. And it's, you could elaborate further on this. You could say that, well, the more intellectual, the more brainy, the more abstract science, the more likely it is to be attacked and basically killed by activists on the left.
Right. Indeed.
And then people might say, that's an anti-intellectual approach because you're against sociology and you're in favor of management and you're in favor of business economics, etc., which is supposed to be lower. Not as pure, not as intellectual.
It's applied.
It's applied, yes.
Yeah.
But then you could say, well, applied science, there is something great about it. It cannot not as easily be fooled and manipulated and killed off by silly parasitic ideas from the left.
And I'm going to give you a test of exactly what you just said. So
Yes.
When I first began to take my show, so to speak, to
Yeah.
Darwinize the business school, and I would be
Yeah.
speaking to two groups of people. It would be either academics or
Yes.
it would be practitioners, right?
Yes.
And I noticed, well, within the academics, if they were natural science minded, then they would love what I'm doing. But if they were in the social sciences, they'd be like, what's this biology stuff? What are you talking about? You're a heretic.
Yes.
But the
Yes.
practitioners, right? So if I give a talk in front of a bunch of high-powered executives about how to maximally design advertising messages that are
Yes.
in line with our evolutionary instincts, well, the
Yes.
advertisers say, yeah, that gorgeous. That makes perfect sense.
Yes.
You're helping us, right? It was the academics that exhibited the greatest resistance because
Yes.
they were wedded to an ideology that seemed contrary to what I was saying. So, if, for example,
Yes.
if they were social constructivists, then they
Yes.
didn't like biology, and therefore I was a heretic that needed to be burnt at the stake. But the practitioner, the business person, doesn't give a damn about ideology. Can you help me develop a better advertising message? Yes.
Yes.
I want to speak to you. No, get out of my room. And so
Yes.
I had that feedback when I went to academia versus practitioners.
Yeah, which is very interesting. It seems as if we are two academics, and we seem to be a little bit critical towards academia in a sense. I'm surprised at the fact that I'm not saying I think academia is a terrible engagement, terrible occupation, but there certainly are a lot of problems with this lofty, ivory tower intellectualism, because to me the problem is ideology. The problem is truly a kind of saturation with ideology. And just briefly, I thought about that. I thought about the same thing as you're talking about now, a little while ago. And for instance, if you build cars, Mercedes cars, and then you produce them, and then somebody wants to take a drive, and he turns the ignition key, nothing happens. He's not going to buy the car. And then you say, well, I can reduce the price. No, it doesn't work. Thank you. Bye-bye. I'm going somewhere else. But then I've been working for many years at departments of social work. And sadly, no names mentioned, but sadly, it is my impression that a lot of these social workers, we fuel them with ideas, and these ideas do not work. So they come out to societies, and I've heard many stories about this. They come out and they are full of enthusiasm, and then they are supposed to work with clients and bureaucracies to help unemployed people, all kinds of important stuff. And then there is a complete imminent crash between the practitioners out there in the bureaucracies, the social agencies, etc., and the enthusiastic young, mostly female social workers with a degree. And there is no connection whatsoever between the two. No connection.
And by the way, when those policies fail, they don't take the opportunity to revise their positions. It must be because you didn't apply the policies properly. So it's like socialism and communism has failed in 100 different places. That doesn't prove that socialism and communism is a wrong system. It simply proves that you didn't apply true socialism. If only you apply true Islam, then we would all be living in a utopia.
Exactly. So just to get back to the comparison between a Mercedes and these social workers, the social workers, they can study and they can write all kinds of nonsense in their exams, and they get a pass because they say the right things ideologically, but not scientifically, but ideologically. And then they get the degree, and then they go out, and then they wreak havoc. And their impact on society and on the social agencies and unemployment agencies, they are at best nothing, but mostly purely negative. Right. So that's like a Mercedes, and you turn the ignition key, nothing happens. But this charade can go on indefinitely, for decade after decade after decade. We're pumping out tens and hundreds of thousands of young, keen, engaged social workers, and they what they are doing is detrimental to society. And yet we can do it because no one is willing to check it. Like you can check a Mercedes. Okay, it doesn't work. You need to build another car. But so when they come out to an unemployment agency, the problem is never on the side of the academics, the social workers, the students. The problem is always among the practitioners, the people who actually work with people who are unemployed and who might have some practical knowledge about it. And again, it seems like I have an anti-intellectual agenda here. So do you. But I think it makes perfect sense, because I think there is, and this also goes back to the entire aloofness of academia these days, where I would say, I can say it now because I think I'm going to write at least a paper about it. I think that maybe you could, to be a little bit provocative, I think you could ask 9 out of 10 students engaged in social sciences to go home, and also 9 out of 10 academics in the social sciences. Maybe you should go home. You should find another job, because what you're doing makes no sense. It has no relation to the real world. And
indeed.
So that's rather pessimistic, but I think these are very important issues, and I fully agree with what you said before about the conflict between the intellectuals and the real world. It's a huge problem.
Indeed. I'm very thankful that folks like you exist. There aren't too many people who are pushing back. It's not that we are anti-intellectualism. It's actually, I would, not to toot our own horn, it's precisely because we value intellectualism so much that we despise the faux intellectualism that is being spread on campuses. And so for that, I thank you. There are too few people who put their necks out on the line in academia to fight. You're certainly one of the few who does it.
And you're one of them too, Gerd, and I'm very, very happy to be here, and thanks for a great conversation.
It was amazing. I look forward to following your work and making sure that you keep causing all sorts of headaches to people who deserve to have headaches. So thank you so much, Göran. Stay on the line. We'll say our official goodbyes. Thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you. Cheers.
Thanks, Gerd. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thank you.